Go away for a couple of weeks and 500 new people join the channel. That's amazing. Look at that, over 2 million people. There was 40,000 views this past week. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michael Markowsky. Welcome to my studio. Today we are going to recreate another painting by another one of my favorite artists. Today we are going to be recreating this painting, A Young Girl by Pierre Bonnard from around 1910. I'm not sure why it doesn't say that on the top, but I can assure you that that's roughly. In fact, let's just see if I can make that change. I'm a huge fan of Bonnard, and he is such an unusual painter, a kind of a person who was sort of doing his own thing, and at a very important time in art history, that transitional period between Impressionism and what is known as like modernism or high modernism, avant-garde modern art of the early 20th century. And there's no one really exactly like Bonnard, which is why I think he's such a fascinating figure, a fascinating artist. And I want to begin by looking at this painting by him, which is a very, minor painting, I suppose one might say. I've only seen a couple of reproductions of it, and all my books of Bonnard are upstairs. And yet there's something about it that I think is just super enigmatic. And also I think of all the Bonnard pieces we could do, probably the easiest one for most people. Some of his other ones are way more complicated. So I think this might be a good introduction for anyone who's never heard of Bonnard and who wants to learn how to paint like Bonnard. And then we're going to do another painting next week, which is a little bit more complex and has a lot more detail. So once we sort of learn a little bit about his technique, we can go on and explore more of his work that might take us perhaps a little bit more time as well. So that's the painting we're going to recreate today. This is the schedule for the afternoon here. We're going to get an image onto the canvas. I'll show you how to do that and where to find the template. We're going to stain the painting with a little bit of color. That's called the Imprimatura. And then we're going to talk about the biography of Pierre Bonnard. Underpainting, that's going to be interesting, because that's something we're going to really talk about. Is his use of line, or lack thereof, is a major theme in his artwork. So how we approach underpainting, I haven't gotten there yet. And the background is fairly simple, so most of the time we're going to spend our time in the foreground. And ideally this will be a 3-hour-ish episode if I can help myself from rambling too much, as I'm doing right now. So before we launch into that, just a quick reminder to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you know when future episodes are coming up. Take a photograph of the artwork you create, join our Facebook group, and upload your artwork to the Facebook group. There's, I think, like 1,200 people as part of that group right now. It's an amazing community, started through the chat in one of these episodes. So, and if you want to support the channel with a small donation, $1, $5 through PayPal Super Chat, that's literally how I've been managing to keep this painting and drawing series running almost 4 years after it began, right? So let's dive right into that. And again, thank you to all of those of you who continue to support the channel after all of this time. Okay. So the first thing we want to do is get an image onto the canvas. Now there's lots of different ways that one could do this. Certainly you could draw the image, and if you've never drawn or you not feel comfortable with drawing, then you could take my free drawing course here on YouTube. It's the most popular thing I've ever done on, probably in life. There's like 500,000 views on those painting or drawing introductory drawing courses. the videos of the introductory drawing course. So lots of people have done those and really enjoy them. So if you want to learn how to draw, you can do that. But if you feel like, you know what, Michael, I just want to paint. Do I really need to know how to draw? Well, I would say it would be helpful to know how to draw. But if you want to just cut right to the chase, you could download my free downloadable template from the Dropbox folder in the description below. So that Dropbox folder, let's scroll to, there's, I think it's the second link down below. You click on that link. It's going to open up a Dropbox folder full of folders. And the top folders are for your introductory episodes on what paint to buy, how to do the color wheel, all that kind of stuff. And then the next maybe 80 episodes here are for relatively easy paintings. In fact, ooh, now it makes me think I should have a folder here for Bonnard. So if you're watching this after, this might be where today's painting might end up in here. But currently, it is way down here. This next numbered set of folders, 160 of them or so, are for more complex paintings. And so, because Bonnard he's one of those who's maybe deceptively difficult or easy, depending on how your point of view. So anyway, there's 6 files in here. You're going to see there is the original 2 paintings that I want to do as part of our time looking at Bonnard, and I might even do another one. I've got 2 other ones already created, but then there's the outlines for each one of those, and you'll see there's a JPEG and a PDF of each one of them. So download them, print them out on your inkjet printer at home on regular photocopy paper. You could use your printer at work if you want. Just don't tell the boss. So there's a couple of the other ones there that we may do here. Weather permitting, time permitting, maybe weather permitting. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put this onto a 9x12 sized canvas board, or canvas panel, as you see here. And I ordered these from Amazon. I actually really like these. I've used these for maybe 200 of our 400 painting episodes. And I ordered these off of Amazon. They come out to about $2 a piece when you order them in sets of 12. And I think they're better than the ones you get for half the price for $1 at the dollar store. Because I think they probably both have cardboard inside, but this has a higher quality cardboard that is less likely to warp or bend if you saturate it with water, whereas the ones from the dollar store just, they're like a sponge, and unless you're painting very thin on them, you'll notice that they. But either way, I suggest getting cheaper materials if you're learning to paint, so that you don't feel like you wasted money when you use more expensive materials. And so these come usually wrapped in plastic. I take the plastic off, and then I give it a light sanding with some 100 grit sandpaper just to take off the texture. And then I wipe it with a wet cloth or a damp cloth to get all that off. And then I apply a second coat of white acrylic gesso. I let that dry overnight, and then I sand it with some 220 grit sandpaper, right? And in some episodes you see me sanding them. I try to do all the sanding outside, so I have less plaster powder all over all my equipment here. And then I'm going to tape this down. Just noticing my voice feels a little it sounds raspy today. I think this might be one of the first times I've talked to anybody today. It's one of those days, or I guess I was talking to my daughter this morning on the way to school, but it's been a few, like 6-7 hours since because I've just been really immersing myself in Bonnard's work, doing research today and thinking about his work, reading. I've got, 5 giant books from the library, yeah, so I guess my voice needs to warm up just like my painting fingers, right? So I should mention that I'm about to use here some graphite transfer paper. I know this says carbon transfer paper, but I don't think there's any carbon transfer paper left in here. I buy this package from Amazon of carbon paper or graphite paper. I think it's like 100 sheets for $10 or something. And honestly, for what I'm using it for, I will probably have those 100 sheets until the day I die. Which one I hope will be a long time from now. So, because you can use, as you'll see here, these sheets over and over again. So they have two sides. One side has the carbon or graphite glued to it, and one side doesn't. You can get double-sided carbon paper. And you want the gray side facing up, so that the black side faces down, because that's what we're going to use to transfer lines onto the other surface. So one of the things that I was thinking about just as I was setting up today is how today's painting, almost more than any other artist we've ever looked at, these outlines are my best guess as to where to put a line where one may not really exist at all. Because of the nature of the way Bonnard painted, one of the stylistic qualities that is so iconic about the work of Bonnard is a kind of a dreamlike ambiguity, where trying to figure out where where something begins and ends, and let's say the background begins and ends around it is impossible to determine. It kind of reminds me of, now who's the author? Okay, now that's okay. There's an author, a Latin American author, who wrote a story about a map maker who's so determined to map the exact length of the shoreline so that he can accurately map exactly how long the shoreline is, that he ends up creating a map that is one-to-one scale of the original shoreline, because he's like, no, it's not. If I make a line there, it's not quite the right place. So he basically recreates the Earth in order to map the Earth, which I've always thought was just such a wild concept. Because anyone who's, it's like, well, like if you think of like, where's the shoreline, right? Well, it sounds kind of easy, but the water comes up and it goes down, and it's so, and that could technically really dramatically affect how much land or how much water a country might have or a city might have. Anyway, you'll see that there's also some kind of vague lines in the background and on her face. I'm not going to transfer those. Those are maybe more helpful if you were just coloring or directly maybe watercoloring onto the paper, the outline. Oh my goodness, look at all of the chat there. And we've got all the usual suspects there. There's Lolly and Lisa and Deborah. Did I hear Rick was there? See something on my periphery? And there's Flash. It says, love your courses. Keep it up. You're an amazing artist and beautiful. Oh, is it? Well, I'll take it. Whatever. I think it ends there, but that's a great place to end a sentence. You are beautiful. Okay, thank you. So let me move that out of the way. Oh my goodness, this studio is in need of organization, Michael. Oh my goodness. I think somebody broke into the studio and made this mess. I cannot possibly be responsible for all of this disaster. Okay. So that's one step down. Let's move on. The next thing we want to do is we want to apply some sort of color or a stain or a priming layer to the painting. Now, you don't have to do this, and a lot of artists don't today, but historically, 99% of artists in the Western world did some kind of a stain on their on a canvas. Obviously, some artists, when they're painting on wood, probably wouldn't, and that's probably why artists, when we started working on panel painting or canvas painting in the kind of late Renaissance period, where you start seeing the Imprimatura really take off. So maybe before I explain exactly what that is, let's just talk about the paint that I'm about to use and the palette that I'm going to use, the same palette I've used for the past 300 of these painting episodes. So it's what we call a split primary palette. I didn't invent this thing, but when I heard about it about 15 years ago, about 10 years after I graduated from art college, it was like, how come no one told me this? This makes so much sense. So that's why I like showing people how to use this, especially beginners. Once you've mastered this system, you could certainly go on to more complex and more specific different palettes. But essentially what we have is, instead of one yellow, one red, and one blue, we've split them in half into their warm and cool components. So we have 2 yellows, 2 reds, 2 blues. In other words, a warm yellow and a cool yellow. Because every color has a temperature. And I'm not going to go into explaining what that's all about, because I did a whole 2-hour long episode talking all about that stuff. But suffice to say, it is, I think, essential to at least understand whether you want to deploy it or not. And when you understand color temperature, it's a game changer. So we're also going to use some white, but I'm not going to use black in today's painting, because we can mix our own black, and that's something that I like doing all the time, because I like showing people how you can make your own black from very bright colors, because I think it's also a really fundamental painting exercise. So, come on. Let's go, here we go. Okay. So then, this is the brand of paint that I'm about to use. I'm not paid or sponsored by them in any way. And these Amsterdam paints, this is the 250 milliliter size, which you can get for about, depending on where you're buying them from, about $12 to $17, $19. And if you get a whole set of these paintings, especially at this size, you could probably do about 150, 200 paintings with them. Which, if that'll add up to about $150 worth of materials. But, I mean, I don't know how fast of a painter you are, but I've done 300 paintings in, 3 years? So, I've basically gone through about 3 or 4 sets of these paints over that period of time, because I'm also doing some much more, using a lot of volume of paint at times as well. But if you don't want to use this brand, and you're going to see I'm going to use this color momentarily, you can use golden, which is a much smaller amount of paint for twice the amount of money. A higher quality, but whether you're going to notice that or anybody else will is a matter of debate. Liquitex, they also make a student grade and a professional grade of paint. This Amsterdam paint is generally considered to be like a student grade or college student grade or intermediate grade of paint. I was at Michael's the other day and I saw them that they classify this as a professional grade of paint, which just goes to show that, you know, no one will ever agree on anything when it comes to art, or maybe in life in general, right? Then we've got Artist Loft brand from Michael's Art Supply. That's their proprietary brand. There's Buzz, Holbein, Dialer Rowney, Fevacryl, Nova Color, Chroma Color. But I gotta tell you, I'm not the biggest fan of Museum Color nor Peebo. In fact, another thing with these Peebos, and I gotta figure, I got a couple of these Peebo tubes of paint, and I often buy a lot of paint at the same time. And when I went to use them, I noticed that the paint has solidified inside here. It's just one kind of blob of hardened silly putty. So I got to think of, like, how could I use these? I was going to just throw them out, but I thought, well, you know what? Maybe I could use them to build up texture. I could kind of cut them into, like, doughy shapes and plop them on, because I don't know. It's like a, you know, a sailor. You don't ever want to change the name of your boat. That's bad luck. It's something with, like, artists throwing away paint or throwing other people's art out that just seems like bad idea. You're gonna get the paint police up on you. So anyway, let's let's get some paint on the palette. Well, you know, let me just take a quick second and look at the original and just see how we might want to apply this. Because I will say, the last few paintings we did, I also did use different Imprimaturas. The previous episode, the Duchamp fountain, or the urinal, as some people might call it, I used a green Imprimatura. Here, when we were painting these artworks by Freytag Loringhoven, I did one with blue Imprimatura, and one with red Imprimatura. Where's the blue one? So, I don't know, it kind of has me on a little bit of a kick of using different colors as Imprimatura. If only just to remind people that it's an option. That I mean, I would say 99% of the time I use a warm yellow. But you know, I'm just looking at this painting, and that sure looks like some kind of brownish red underneath everything. So okay, I think I'm seeing what's going on here. Is he using... I wonder... I think he... Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to... do something which I haven't done in a long time, which is actually to make a brown Imprimatura, which is the more... the most traditional way of painting an Imprimatura. And I've kind of moved off of that just for the sake of convenience. But this might be a time, especially since this is maybe a slightly more simple painting, that maybe this is a good time to do something like that. So another thing too is I've got a lot of these tubes that are almost empty, and what I usually do is I cut them open and scrape out the extra paint, and then I use them for, and I scrape out all the extra paint into these little jars, and you know, that's like 8 or so paint tubes that I otherwise would have thrown out, and that's enough paint to keep me busy for quite a while. Good thing about having painting pants is it makes for a great rag right on your body. Just remember that you do have paint on your body, that if you were to get up and go answer the phone and sit down on your couch, that paint is still going to be there. So, lots of comments in the chat there. I'll try to get to that as quickly as I can. Oh, and there's Kathy there. And there's Flip Le Tap says, "Hi everyone, I'm Fred." Okay. So once I get this step done, I'll go through the chat there because there's so many messages. Okay, so I forgot to put white, but that's not going to be for, well, it might be sooner than later, but I'm going to need more of that, aren't I? Well, we'll get it on there. Okay, so I'm going to mix a brown, and I'm going to mix a warm brown because we're going to use this for the also in the face of the young girl. So basically, to make a brown, I start with an orange, warm yellow and warm red, and that makes an orange. And then I'm going to put some blue in here. The more blue I put into a brown, the darker that brown is going to be. Let's just see. I'm thinking the color we're looking for, it's a very reddish brown. I think that's probably what I'm seeing on her neck. I think that's probably the exposed Imprimatura coming through here. So that obviously is too dull of a brown. There's too much blue in there. So let's put more red back in here. And even a little bit more yellow. I'm going to put even more red in there. Now, I'm also going to dilute this. I could just apply a thick layer of paint onto the canvas. But that's also going to really darken the image. So what I'm doing here is I'm using some matte medium. This is actually not the original jar. I've just put it into a smaller jar. This is by that museum, or actually no, this is the Opus brand of acrylic. And so matte medium is just clear acrylic paint. It doesn't have any pigment in it. And so it's going to dry clear. And so I'm going to add more of this. Just don't want to run out halfway through here. Now obviously the more I add to this, the more transparent that paint is going to be. But I'm also using the white of the board here as a way of, it's going to help create a luminous quality to the painting. So it won't be, so this right now might look a little bit darker than I think it's going to be here in just a few minutes. So, you know, when you hear me say, because usually I use that warm yellow, and I always say, traditionally, artists would use a warm brown or a rusty red color, right? This is what I'm talking about. So from now on, when I talk about that, I'll say, go watch that Bonnard episode that I did, and that'll give you an idea of what you maybe should do if you want to be historically accurate. You'll notice that I like getting the edges of my painting. That's just something that I've always been interested in, is the edge of an artwork. I'm that weirdo who, when I go to an art museum, I'm looking at the sides of paintings, and the security gets all uncomfortable because they think I'm trying to figure out how to steal the painting and get it off the wall. But I'm looking at the edge and thinking about how different artists manage the edges of an artwork. Oh, that looks so nice. I don't know if you could see that in person. Maybe I'm going to do this again from now on. I at one point was doing that all the time, and then I just started going directly to the warm yellow as a time-saving device, but that is also so beautiful. What a nice color. Okay. So maybe I should have shown that on camera. What I was just doing is I'm just consolidating any of the extra paint on the palette into one little blob here, so that I can potentially, if I did want to or need to, I could go back to that color later on. I'm not anticipating that I'll need to do that, but hey, if I did want to, let's say something terrible, calamitous happened, and I needed to get back to the Imprimatura, or like I make a mistake and I'm like, ah! I could scrape all that paint away or paint over it with some white, apply the same color, and it would literally be as if nothing happened. The only clue that something would have been there is we might see a difference in texture, perhaps. And obviously, if it was X-rayed by, you know, curators 100 years from now, they would notice that that area had been painted over. But otherwise, that would be your secret to completely hiding your unhappy accident. Because if it was a happy accident, then you wouldn't want to cover it up, because you'd be so happy, like Bob Ross, right? Who, of course, coined the term happy accident. Okay. Oh, that's great. Huh. I haven't done something like that in a long time. And it is nice to see, but, you know, again, there was that extra little bit of step where I'm mixing the colors, as opposed to just taking the yellow right out of the tube, the warm yellow out of the tube, and applying it with a little bit of matte medium to thin it out, or water. In fact, usually I say I add, I don't know why I added matte medium instead of water today. Is it a full moon or something? I guess it's just been a couple of weeks since I last did one of these episodes, so I'm a little bit out of my routine. Okay. I'm just going to quickly blow dry this so that while I'm yabbering on, I don't get this paint all over the place. Oh, and there's Lisa in the chat. There's a lot of stuff in the chat. Let me just go through the chat here real quick here. Lisa says, I'm so ready to watch you paint. Lolly says, we missed you, Michael. I hope you had a nice time relaxing. Time off relaxing. Lolly says, hi, Deb. Hope you and Rick are well. Deborah says, sorry, I don't have my glasses on and I cannot see my typing. Lolly says, don't worry, Deb. I'm not typing anything that makes sense anyway. Oh, there's Kathy there. Hi, everyone. I just got home. Looks like a good one. And then Fleepletap says, hi, everyone. I'm loving the drawing classes so far. Kathy says, is talking about the new Descending the Staircase by Duchamp that we did. I noticed on the Facebook group, a number of people tried to recreate that painting as well. And I was, first of all, I was really surprised and excited, and the results were amazing. You know, it was not really the thing that I would have thought would have been quite popular for people to paint. And just as the painting I'm talking about is this one here by Marcel Duchamp. But surprisingly, many of you have taken on the challenge to recreate this painting. And I think the results, this actually turned out much better than I thought. And even maybe when I was painting this, I was like, I don't know. But now, the more I see it, the more I am really excited about it. And again, I say that because I know many people watching right now find themselves to be very underwhelmed, to say the least, about some of the work they create. And that, I think, is very typical. Often artists, all we can see is the problems, and it's not until you kind of put it away for a little while where then you look at it as, you know, like after a break, wow, this is much better than I remember it being. Huh, that's okay, that's strange. I thought this was a bit of a lost cause, but actually it's pretty good. Right, so if you're not happy with your work, just put it away for a little while, and two things will usually happen. Maybe three things. One is that potentially your worst fears will be confirmed, and you'll be like, yeah, oh my goodness, this is worse than I thought it was. That, on occasion, does happen. Two, you look at it and think, wow, oh, wow, I thought this was a disaster. This might be the best thing I've ever done. It's funny how just a little bit of time changes things. And then the third thing that could happen is you look at it and you do see maybe what you're not so happy with, but you, as time has evolved, and maybe you've worked on other paintings, you've gathered some skills or ideas for how to improve it. And you look at it and go like, oh, okay, that's a 5-minute fix. Okay, I see what I did wrong here. Okay, no problem. And so those are, I'd say, the three most common reactions. And I think the more and more experience you get as a painter, the less of the first one of the, oh my goodness, this is terrible. The less of that reaction you have, and the more positive reactions you'll have towards your work. Although, again, the famous example I've given many times is the great English painter J.M.W. Turner famously came to his own exhibitions with a little palette in his pocket, so that he could constantly fix paintings that he had done and sold decades before. And he would get arrested and thrown out of places, mistakenly believed to be a hobo who had wandered into the art gallery, because he was never happy with any of his work. And that's also very true. I think, you know, a lot of artists were like, we can be begrudgingly happy with the work, but maybe we're always thinking, next time I'll do a little bit better. Okay. And tangent closed. Okay. While he's talking about the new Descending the Staircase Duchamp painting, my brain was breaking from beginning to end with it. My eyes were crossed throughout. I still have no idea if it looked good or utterly horrendous. Yeah, it takes a lot of patience to do that. Kat says, I just did another Van Gogh sunflower. You know what? It might be time to revisit those sunflowers by Van Gogh. I did, before I even started these master study classes, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago or so, I did a Van Gogh painting, which has, I don't know, 100,000 views or something, but it was a different time and place, and maybe I would approach it differently. So, mental note. And I'm sure that would be popular anyway, so... oh, where are we here? Lolly likes these Imprimatura switcheroos. Okay. Lolly reminding people to hit the like button. Oh, you're so sweet. And there's Rick saying hello. Got our latest COVID boosters day. I'm beginning to feel a little bit achy. So I've been keen to watch the episode and do the painting. I hope that a little bit of discomfort passes soon, Rick. Lolly says, I use this kind of color for my undercoating as well. Cool. Lolly says, did you go on vacation, Michael, or just chill at home? I went to Calgary to visit the family. Brought the grandchild, my parents, and it was actually really beautiful weather there. It's usually the winter starts to set in there, but it was beautiful in Calgary, Alberta. We went to the Royal Tyrell Dinosaur Museum in Drumheller, Alberta, which is literally the best dinosaur museum on Earth. And it was so cool just seeing our daughter just running around for 2 solid hours squealing with joy. That's got to be one of the best museums I've ever been to, and it still holds up. I remember going there on class field trips as a kid. The Royal Tyrell Museum. I'm just going to do my own little plug for that. Because it's a great place for little kids and a great place for adults. Both people can be just fascinated for hours and hours and hours going through that museum. And there's few museums that are like that, where people of all generations can walk through a museum and be completely entranced. There's always generally one group or another that is like, how much longer until we're done? You know, even at an art museum, even if 2 good friends go, there's probably somebody who's like, I think I'm done. You know, we're meeting I think I'm going to go get a sandwich. You take your time. I'm just going to go sit down. I'm kind of not into this, right? Whereas dinosaurs, all ages, genders, tend to be kind of fascinating. Anyway, I don't know why I'm talking about that, but the question was what I was up to the past couple weeks. Randy says, I'm finally here. Did I miss anything? How's everyone doing this fine evening? It's a little chilly here. Hi, Randy. And there's Anujab, or Anujab says, hello. And says, you can call me Anuja. Is that Anuja? Anuja? Cool. What a great group. Okay. You know, I'll actually, just looking at this really quickly, I'll just say that now that this is dried, the exciting, vibrant qualities that were here have kind of dissipated a little bit. I'm not sure how much that shows up on camera, but I will say that that when this was wet, it really glowed. Now that it's dried down, it looks a little, I wouldn't say somber, but it doesn't have quite the vibrancy. And I would say that had I painted my warm yellow that I typically do underneath this, I would expect this to be a little bit more intense looking. That kind of warm yellow coming through would would dial up the warmth an extra like 30%, and I suspect it would still have a little bit more just a little bit more vibrant than this currently is. Not that this is bad, and we're going to cover most of this up with paint in a few minutes anyway, but I just want to track that observation at the moment, because it does, in my own mind, I think about that like, oh, okay, because here I've got like white coming through, and this instead would be yellow coming through. Now, the Impressionists, as Bonnard was kind of a key figure in the movement, or the transition from Impressionism to Modernism, avant-garde painting, he, along with a lot of Impressionists, did not use an Imprimatura and painted directly onto a white canvas. So this is probably actually more akin to the way that he would have worked himself, but it is a little bit... I would probably personally prefer for it to be just a bit more intense, personally. Would that... So, just before I move on, some people would say, well, why not just put more yellow in the paint and make this a bit more of an orangey color? Aha! That does, on the surface, make some sense. The difference, though, is if I painted this yellow and then painted this color on top, it would be some yellow coming through and also mixing with this color. So I would still see this color, but the white coming through would no longer be white, it would be yellow. So it would overall have a bit more of a yellow quality for sure, versus if I mixed more yellow into this brown, this color, the color itself would look more yellow, and yet I would still have the white coming through. So it's almost one of those things I would have to do a like side-by-side comparison to show. And an example I might give would be the difference between layering toppings on like a club sandwich versus putting all those toppings into a blender and blending it into a smoothie. Now, I know which one I would prefer to eat. It would be the club sandwich with all the textures preserved as different layers, so when I bite through it, I get the satisfaction of blending it into my mouth, which sounds kind of gross, but versus the blended club sandwich would be, you know, it might not even look like that same color. It might be green or something, who knows, or yeah, I'm not sure if that analogy holds up there or not. Okay, so what do we, let's okay, so let's take a look at the biography of Pierre Bonnard and what makes him such a unusual, original artist, an artist who kind of was unlike any other artist of his time, maybe even since. So let's start out here. So Pierre Bonnard is born in 1867 and dies in 1947 at age 79, so a nice, long, very productive life. And he's, I think it's worth just sort of noting his birth date here, because he is sort of, he was born and he comes of age at the very end of the Impressionist era, and he is working during that transitional decade or so of the 1890s, because during the 1890s there's a period of time where Impressionism is sort of falling out of favor, and new art by Picasso, Matisse, and all the other great avant-garde artists, many of whom we've looked at over the time, are kind of coming into prominence. So Bonnard is a figure that exists in that gap period. Of course, he made work before and for decades after that period of time, but he's a really, probably the, well, I was gonna say we're talking like literally top 5 artists of that interstitial space between Impressionism and high modernist art. So we'll get all into that here. So he is born in 1867 in Fontenay-aux-Roses, which is basically a little suburb outside of Paris here. Right here, Fontenay-aux-Roses. Let me see, close this here. So this is, it's not well, it's now considered to be a suburb for sure. 150 years ago, this would have been like a very small little town on the outer edges of Paris. Now it's kind of been consumed by Paris, which just sort of extends endlessly outwards, as many big metropolitan centers do these days. But essentially, he would have sort of grown up in a small town in the countryside, a good, horse-drawn carriage ride away into the center of Paris. So growing up, he would have spent a lot of time outside, in gardens and parks, maybe going into Paris occasionally with his father. His father was a senior officer in the French Ministry of War, which was very active. There was a lot of wars going on in Europe since forever, right? And so his father was a military guy, and anyone who has friends or family, or they themselves grew up in a military household, probably knows what that's like. You have parents who place a high degree of emphasis on organization, cleanliness, value authority, are maybe a little bit more strict than others. Really are big subscribers to like hierarchies, right? That there's someone in command, and then you have people who are subservient to that person. Now, I'm not saying anything negative. I mean, I have family members who are in the military, and I've, as some of you know, I've been embedded with the Canadian Air Force twice, and went up to the North Pole and got to fly around in a fighter plane and make art. So I have a great deal of respect for our men and women in the armed services. I just mean that, basically, the long story short is, Pierre Bonnard, despite being the fact of being very interested in art from a very young age, had a father who was fairly strict and wanted him to do something serious with himself. And essentially that led to Bonnard studying law and eventually graduating with a degree in law, and ostensibly on track to become a lawyer. However, and I don't know if it mentions anything of it in here, but essentially he didn't file after going through that whole process, he didn't file the paperwork to get his final legal license or whatever. And during that time where he's studying to become a lawyer, he's also taking classes in Paris at l'Académie Julienne, which was, and we've talked about, I mean, pretty much all of the great painters, French painters that we've talked about, I'd say maybe 8 out of 10 of them passed through the Académie Julienne at some point. So he's sort of taking these weekend evening classes at the same time he's studying to be a lawyer, which I'm sure there's a few people out there who are lawyers watching me right now and who studied law. I don't know if you'd be able to do that today, just how how much work is involved in studying to become a lawyer. I was just in Calgary visiting with a friend of mine who recently herself became a lawyer, and I mean, that's a lot of work on its own. So taking on a whole other hobby or interest at the same time would have meant for a lot of sleepless nights. But it does go to show that despite his father's insistence on Bonnard becoming a lawyer, he always kind of had that foot in the other interest, and was like not willing to let it go, because that would have just been a lot of work, right? So he basically, during the year when he graduates from law school, he starts making posters and prints, doing some commercial artwork, and he starts selling this artwork, and that goes a long way to eventually him essentially coming out to his family and saying, listen, I know I did all this legal stuff. I did exactly what you wanted me to do, Dad. But I just want you to know that, I've always really liked to draw. Well, I hope you don't get angry, but I've been making a bunch of posters and things for, cabarets and dance halls and logos and stuff, and I'm actually doing pretty well. And, it's basically the same salary that I'd be getting as a lawyer doing this art stuff, and I really want to do the art stuff. So that kind of, one might say he played his cards very well, and that allowed him to sort of get the maybe begrudging support of his family to transition from his mandated legal future towards, eventually he applied, or actually during that same summer, he applies to l'École des Beaux-Arts, the famous French University of Art in Paris, and so he goes there to study, and so he's there for a few years. While he's there, he meets another really important painter, Edouard Villard, and Villard, who we're going to do an episode on later on, I think later on in November, which is like 2 weeks from now. So we're going to do an episode on Villard, also with a couple of other friends that he met while he was doing these evening classes at the Académie Julian, Cerisier and Denis. Both were, and all of these artists and a few other ones end up forming a group called Les Nabis, which is, let's actually bring that up here. So when did they form? 1888. So like right off the bat, like he is like a man on a mission, right? I think probably the fact that he has made this hard transition from going into law into going into art, he feels a lot of urgency to make things happen now. He's not going to screw around. He is like, okay, if I'm going to do this and I've got my military dad breathing down my neck, and they are sort of maybe just waiting for me to slip up and come begging back, hat in hand, apologizing for having made this terrible decision to pursue art. He is like, I have got to make this work. I have got to do something bold. I have got to make a name for myself as an artist. Otherwise, I'm forever going to be the black sheep of the family. So he, along with a number of his other friends that he makes when he's in art school, in both art schools that he attended, forms this group called Les Nabis. Les Nabis is essentially the Hebrew term for prophets. And the idea was that they would kind of form almost in jest, like a secret society of artists that were, there's a great deal of interest in mysticism and esotericism. During the late 1800s, you have people like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who's interested in communicating with the dead. You know, you have seances are very popular. And I'm not saying that these guys are interested in any of that stuff, but there's a lot of this. I guess in today's world, we'd almost call it like New Age. Uh, People who are just looking for some kind of alternative to the mainstream, whether that be mainstream medicine or mainstream science or mainstream, religion or philosophy. You have kind of a part of this is as a result of the Industrial Revolution, where there's the Industrial Revolution. You have, part of it is building of factories and machines and locomotives and these factories that are pumping out tons of carbon dioxide into the air, and soot that gets on everything, and everyone's sort of dirty, and that's because that was a real problem in the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, with people literally dying from these clouds of smog, which would descend into often poorer places near those factories and kill people, right? So that was before they instituted certain kind of standards as to like how and what you could use as fuel and stuff in the inner city. But anyway, there's the mechanical is sort of everywhere, and things are speeding up, and there's the scale of war, of machine guns for the first time, cannons which can just chew up human bodies, and the scale of armies at combat, which culminates in World War I, where you have battles where 50,000 people in one afternoon are killed. But then you also have during the rise of the Industrial Revolution, this real interest in like rational thought. That there's this idea that if we can build trains that can go all the way across the continent in several days, in which would have been journeys that could have taken people years in the past. Now we can do that in days. We can kind of do anything. We've figured it all out, right? What's left that the human mind is incapable of doing? There is sunlight on everything, right? That the mind can see all and figure it all out. And so for some people that is really exciting, this purely rational world. But then there's other people who are kind of like, let's just pump the brakes here, everybody. I'm not sure, the direction we're moving in is necessarily the one we want to go in, and maybe there's some things, maybe there's aspects of life that are that we want to keep a little bit more ambiguous, like and things that maybe can't be explained, like, as I said, like interested in mysticism, in ghosts, and communicating with the dead, with alternative medicine. But also you have artists who are interested in dreams and the fantasy world, and that's sort of where Les Nabis fit in, that they consider themselves to be artists that are reacting against the materialism, the commercialism of the industrial world in which they find themselves surrounded by at the end of the 19th century. So they essentially, this group that they form it is like a secret society. They literally had their own handshakes, their own they would sign their artwork with sort of coded messages, and for the most part, it was actually quite silly. Like, it was kind of like they named the studio they named. What was it called? Oh, it's gonna drive me crazy. I don't know if it would be okay. Yeah, here we have throughout their existence, Les Nabis were a sort of half-serious, semi-secret society who used humorous nicknames and a private vocabulary. Even the name of the group was secret until 1897, 9 years after it was formed. They called the studio an ergasterium and ended their letters with the initials ETPMVAMP, signifying "En ta paume, mon verbe et ma pensée." In your palm, my word and my thoughts. You know, like, so, yeah, and I'm sure probably some of these are you know, maybe sons of members of, let's say, like the Freemasons, right? People whose own family, you know, especially I'm sure Bonnard, probably his father being in the military, there's probably some Freemasonry perhaps in there. My own grandfather was a Freemason, you know, so, which today, you know, there's a lot of these like Masonic lodges which have been converted into, you know, commercial buildings now, because a lot of those kind of societies have gone away. But back in the day, they formed a really important purpose. So I'm sure that was probably also in the back of their mind, right? Like, how do we break through? And again, if you think about the era that Bonnard is coming to prominence, like as a young man, it's at the tail end of the Impressionist movement. So Impressionism kind of begins in the 1870s and lasts through the 1880s. Its high point is kind of mid to late 1880s, and initially at first it was, you know, shocking to the mainstream world, but eventually, just like a lot of things which are shocking at first, become kind of normalized and kind of become embraced by the mainstream. And so that's also what had happened, that this movement, which at one point had been kind of a revolutionary art movement, now just became kind of the stuff my parents like. You know, it's like when I was in Calgary, I went for breakfast with my parents, and we're at a breakfast you know, some little restaurant, and they're blaring, you know, Nirvana and Hole and Smashing Pumpkins, like, and not their you know, unplugged sessions from MTV, but like the loud, you know, grungy stuff that I remember I used to hear when I used to go to bars, like really dark bars, and be blaring, and I'm like, wow, this is the music that was like, there was no breakfast place when I was growing up that would dare play music like this. But now here it is, this music which was once revolutionary is now just background music in a Denny's, right? And so that's kind of like what Impressionism was for Bonnard as he's, you know, sneaking out of law school to study at l'Académie Julienne. So there's, you know, there's a few things that come of that. Like, you have, he would have wanted to think like, well, how do we break through, like, the Impressionist breakthrough? How do we rebel against what they did? What is the next step? Now that this once revolutionary movement is now just everywhere, and people just take it for granted that this is what art is now, like, we want to create our own kind of breakthrough. So there's that kind of thing. It establishes kind of, you know, something to rebel against. And it also kind of showed the importance of a group coming together, a bunch of individuals coming together as a group to, with common interest, to pursue opportunities that might be harder to find on your own. If you're just a solitary individual, kind of, you know, tilting at windmills like Don Quixote, I mean, good luck. So they kind of saw the Impressionists, okay, that's a model that kind of worked well. They set themselves up as a group. They could exhibit as a group. The newspapers would write about them, and they could get lots of people to come to their shows. So that was another reason that they formed Les Nabis, this group of like-minded post-impressionist artists. So here you just see some of these images. There's a lot. I don't know if there's going to be a lot of them in here, but those prints that Bonnard was doing for. Let me see if there's some in here. Well, I guess here's some more. These are these posters that Bonnard did. These are some of the ones that he did to help convince his father that he could make a living as an artist instead of pursuing his law career that his father hoped he would do. And one of the things that Bonnard was also very interested in, and many of the other... Oops. Overheated. Okay, I'll let that. So one of the things that Bonnard and his friends who were in that group, Les Nabis, were really interested in was Japanese prints that were finding their way from Japan to Europe, really for the first time during the mid 1800s. And so there's this major what do you call it? Fascination with all things Japanese around the mid 1870s, and they call this like Japonaise. I think maybe there's something, or Japanism, and you have I think there's so many European artists are fascinated with Japanese art because it was like art coming from the moon, like from a different planet. It was. And stuff and ideas, methods, techniques that European artists had never seen or heard of before. So, and they're highly developed artworks too. So, it's literally like seeing an alien relic appearing. You're just like, whoa! How do you do this? What are like? Oh my goodness! So it just blew everyone away. And obviously the Impressionists were huge fans of Japanese art as well. Claude Monet famously built a Japanese garden in his backyard in the little in this little village of Giverny, which we'll come back to shortly here, because he was so obsessed with you know the types of plants and the composition, the organization of Japanese gardens. So this interest in Japanese art, and a big feature with a lot of Asian art, is a kind of a flattening of space, where even though some of them, there was an exchange. You had European art also going to Japan, and so you had, for really the first time, this introduction of geometric perspective, which is basically, in my drawing class, I have a couple episodes talking about perspective and how to draw using perspective. And perspective was a European technique that was invented to help create the illusion of depth in space. Right? It's when you see comic books of Spider-Man flying through downtown New York, all those buildings are drawn in perspective. But anyway, we don't see that in Asian art, and so when European artists see this, it's sort of just like, wow, it didn't even occur to me you could do that. Like, because perspective was such a dominant concept that, as the artist David Hockney once said, once you see perspective, or once you see through the lens of a camera, which perspective kind of mimics, it's impossible to not see it, or to unsee it, as he said. So for European artists, seeing art that was done without perspective was, I mean, just revolutionary. So, and we see this kind of through the work of Bonnard going forward, where the sense of depth becomes ambiguous, right? He's not painting things in the traditional way that artists in Europe had been painting for 500 years. He's using a much more Asian, or specifically Japanese, approach to painting and to describing space. So, and that also obviously it becomes why many of the artists in Les Nabis become so fascinated with printmaking, because printmaking was such an important delivery tool of Japanese art. All the great prints by artists like Hokusai and Hiroshige, two artists whose work that we've done in the past in this class, were very famous for using woodblock printing. So that inspires all these European artists in Les Nabis to be like, "Whoa, we gotta! This is amazing. Can we do this?" What else do I want to say about Les Nabis? Just talk my mind away here. Oh, another major interest of besides Japanese art, one of the major fascinations that these artists have is in two artists like Paul Gauguin and Paul Cézanne, the two Pauls. And both of Paul Gauguin, who may be most famously known as a good friend of Vincent van Gogh. Vincent van Gogh cut his ear off after an argument with Gauguin. And Paul Cézanne is often considered to be the grandfather of Cubism, and was highly inspirational to Pablo Picasso and Georges Braque, who invented Cubism. So these are two other artists that are considered to be, like Pierre Bonnard, transitional artists from Impressionism into the new avant-garde movements that are to follow. Although Gauguin and Cézanne were from a little bit of an older generation than Bonnard was. So I guess Gauguin specifically and Van Gogh would have been considered post-impressionists, which became sort of their own movement. Les Nabis is also considered to be a post-impressionist movement, but it's its own thing. Okay, I feel like I should wrap up pretty soon here. I am going to do another episode on Bonnard, so maybe, because I'm probably talking for an hour already, maybe I should wrap this up, and let me just see if I can, let's look at a little bit of the work by Les Nabis, because maybe that could be just sort of helpful, just thinking about that. And then the next episode we'll just sort of talk more about Bonnard's later work, because the painting we're going to be doing, I think, is from a little bit of that later period, and also features his wife, who plays a really important, like, primary role in his work. So here you have all these paintings. Like, I think Bonnard he's probably the most famous member of the Les Nabis group, and he's probably most famous as being a member of Les Nabis. But I would say the work he did in that group is probably not my favorite of the paintings he did. I find them to... How would I describe my feelings or ambivalence towards these works? Well, the palette tends to be kind of muted. There's a lot of kind of browns and greens and yellows. They're not the kind of bright, saturated colors that Bonnard becomes famous for later on. There's a privileging of, like, patterning and almost a little bit of an interest in, like, grotesqueness. Like, the faces that he paints, and we see this through a lot of Bonnard's work later on, things just look really They remind me of another artist like called Daumier. I wonder if there might be even. Okay. Almost like caricatures. Daumier. I love Daumier. Honoré Daumier was a great French printmaker, illustrator, who's very famous for these like cartoon caricature images that he created, and they are like, you know, what is it? Like political cartoons. Like he would be considered to be like a forerunner of political cartooning for sure. Like these gigantic heads, like very contorted faces. And so we see a lot of that in the work of Bonnard as also, that these really strange faces. And I think part of that is because Bonnard, one of Bonnard's famous techniques is he would make often little sketches in small little notebooks and then transform those sketches into big paintings. And that's, on the surface of that, that's not surprising at all. But one of the things at least it seems to me that he did, was instead of trying to fix or refine the sketch when he would enlarge them, he would let them stay really kind of sketchy and strange and weird, and if anything, amplify the strangeness and awkwardness of his sketches. Whereas the majority of other artists, they might do a quick little sketch and be like, okay, this is kind of a little bit silly, but it's just a sketch. And then I'm going to take it and I'm going to make it look pretty again, right? Bonnard was sort of the opposite. He's like, I'm going to take this sketch and whoa, that's weird. That's pretty awful drawing. I'm going to take this awful drawing and now I'm going to even make it look weirder and more bizarre as I transform it into a painting. And not only that, he would also, so he would do often like Bonnard, and we'll talk about this maybe next class, but he often do sketches of his wife. Like his wife might be in a bath, and there's reasons she was someone who, for health reasons, would take long baths. And so he would do kind of little sketches of her, or she'd be kind of sitting at a table, and he would just sort of peer around the corner and do like a 30-second long sketch, and then take those and turn them into paintings. But rather than ask her to come back and, oh, I'm making a painting of you. I saw you sitting at the coffee table this morning, and I did a quick little sketch. I'm making a painting of you. Would you mind just sort of, I'm going to bring my easel and make instead of doing that, he would just take that sketch, go back to his studio, and paint from memory. And that becomes a major theme in the work of Bonnard, is this idea of working from memory, to a lesser extent working from dreams, but that would give that's one of the things that gives Bonnard's work this kind of dreamlike quality, in that things are kind of ambiguous. That's almost, I've seen people describe it as like there's like a veil over it, like you're seeing things through a veil, and things are kind of blurry and indistinct. And it's often because he's working from memory. But again, unlike other artists who also worked from memory, rather than trying to take that memory and then to try to crystallize it and to clarify it and to smooth out the bumps, Bonnard is sort of like, it's like he's trying to capture that experience of remembering, of things being a little bit foggy and blurry. And so and I'll say that is one of the reasons why artists like Henri Matisse, who became a friend of Bonnard's, loved Bonnard's work. Matisse thought Bonnard was the great colorist of his time. Bonnard was just a little bit older than Matisse. And it is also one of the reasons why Pablo Picasso hated Bonnard. Picasso, and I've got some quotes, maybe I'll share in the next class, just had literally nothing nice to say about Bonnard. And so I could imagine, probably still to this day, some people looking at the art of Pierre Bonnard some people are like, wow, this is really cool. This is really neat. I get that dreamlike quality. That's kind of, that's wild. And I could also see simultaneously a lot of other people looking at me like, I don't like this at all. You got to explain to me why you like this stuff, because I don't know, this is garbage, right? So, yeah, how about, I've got all these links, and I've been probably talking for over an hour, so it's time to move on. But I think just we'll come back to these ideas of like dreamlike spaces, of memory informed painting, of artwork that often has no outlines, there's no boundaries. Things are kind of, where the edges of, a person's face and the background, where those things begin and end is very ambiguous. And yes, those are sometimes also key elements of Impressionist painting, which was only, a few years before Bonnard. But Bonnard takes that blurriness, which was, for some people, the worst thing about Impressionism, and dials it up, right? So in many ways, the very thing that older academic artists hated it about Impressionism, Bonnard is like, I'm going to do that. And I'm going to maximize that thing that all of you hate so much about Impressionism. Okay, so let's move on. Now, typically at this point, we do an underpainting, which is perhaps using a darker color to maybe do a little bit of outlining, and especially when we're doing faces, so that we don't lose maybe some of those details, like where the eyes go, where the nose goes, where's the mouth goes. Because as we start painting, it can get a little bit kind of hairy there, and we might start to kind of start painting mask-like shapes, and the face starts to lose its familiarity or its likeness. Typically, that's what we do. But having said what I just said about Bonnard and what makes his work so unique, I think, and because Bonnard is kind of fairly recognized for his lack of outlines, I think it means this might be an opportunity for us to lean into painting a portrait that does not have an underpainting or some outlines in here, which could make that a bit more stressful for some people. So I can understand. Okay, I did say this was a beginner's painting class, though. How about let's have our cake and eat it too? Let's do a little bit of outlines, just so that especially those people who are kind of at the beginning of their painting journey, aren't so lost, because we're going to paint these lines later anyway. So maybe if we paint them now, that could work. So let's mix a little bit of a darker brown. So, essentially, before I move on, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to mix this type of a brown for her, like eyebrows. I'll just do a couple of little dashes, a few little marks there to help. And in fact, remember I said I preserved my Imprimatura from before, right? This is warm yellow, warm red, and a little bit of warm blue, right? I'm just going to take the same color and I'm going to add more blue to it to turn it into a darker brown. So let's take this. Now if I put too much blue in there, now it just kind of goes green. So let's take a little bit more red here, bring that back into this. And now we get a fairly dark brown. Okay. So maybe we don't need to be that zoomed in. Okay, so I'm just going to take this darker brown that I've mixed. Again, this is just, if I was to mix this from scratch, this would have been, you know, mostly warm red, a little bit of warm yellow, and so I would say, let's say, this is probably, say 60% warm red, and maybe 20% warm blue and warm yellow. You know, adjust your ratios as needed. But, you know, we have, let's say, that line on her the edge of her eyebrow and the top of her nose. That eyebrow. Right, so we're basically painting all the darkest parts of the face, like these shadowy areas. So I just noticed there was a kind of a buildup of paint there, a little bit too much texture that I wanted to avoid. Might as well paint a bit of this here. Use up a bit of this brown while we have it. Okay. So there's our, if we want to do an underpainting, I think that would probably be sufficient. Now obviously there's still more I could do. Oh. It is possible that he did this. In fact, he probably, you know, maybe he did do that. As I'm thinking about it, just looking at it. So, maybe I'll continue along this vein here. So, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix a blue underpainting for the shirt. I'm going to take this same brown that we made here, and I'm just going to mix it into some warm blue. So basically making like a really dark brown. Okay. And even further to that, let's break out the white. I'm going to take... Let's wipe... I'm going to wipe this paint off. I'm going to take some white now. Some of my brown. Actually, let's make this. So sort of painting a little bit of a gray. And I would bet, now that I think about it, probably this painting that he worked on looked a little bit like this, probably at an early stage. I don't know if he drew the image out like this, or just really quickly painted it. You know, maybe some of these pencil lines would have been done with that same brown, and then kind of, but it's hard to say. But now that I'm thinking about his process, it wouldn't surprise me if we would have seen something similar to this. Oh, there's Pascal has joined the chat, and Chase. Chase says, would it be hard to paint the Titanic? Oh, good question. Well, I suppose depends on what part of the Titanic and at what stage of the Titanic's journey you're talking about. You're talking about when the Titanic first set sail in the middle of the day, or at nighttime, or when it struck the iceberg, when it's cracking in half and water splashing everywhere, or while it's resting on the bottom of the ocean. There could be a lot, or if it's a very specific interior, like that grand staircase, or Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet on the bow, you know, I'm on top of the world, or what is it they say? She says, painting it sinking. Ah, wow. That would be probably pretty tricky. that would be well, you know, just before I move on, I mean, that might be a challenge. Let's just see. When's the anniversary? I tend to kind of like doing episodes on anniversaries. So just to set sail. Where does it set sail? So it leaves on April 10th, 1912. What? And it sunk on only 4 days later, on April 15th? Really? Oh no, really? The Titanic was only at sail for like 4 days? That's not true, is it? Anyway, I'm not going to read through all of that. That's for a different episode. But yeah, that might be really interesting. But if I was to do the Titanic, I would probably want to try to have it coincide with an anniversary. So probably wouldn't be till next April. But that could be a fun painting to do. Great idea, Chase. I appreciate the suggestion. Right? I'm always looking for something new and different. Maybe we'll do a Titanic week. We'll do the launch of the Titanic and then the sinking Titanic, or the Titanic resting on the bottom. Okay, let's move on here. Now that we've got our underpainting, which I didn't expect to paint, done, let's paint the background and start developing that, and then we'll spend the majority of today's episode painting the foreground. So let's take a look at how Bonnard painted the background here. So as far as I'm concerned, it looks like what he did is put in like almost like a white wash, a very thin white over top of the brown Imprimatura, and then after that painted, I think that's over top of that brown as well. Just curious, what did he do up here? But either way, I think what we're going to do is just paint a white over top of our background. And you can see that this white, it's not just a, I'm not just going to take a big gob of this white and just paint all that out. I could. I mean, if you really wanted to save yourself time, you just wouldn't even paint this brown. You just leave it white, right? Or just paint white over, But obviously, I'm trying to kind of figure out how this master worked his magic. So, where could I do this? So I'm going to put some matte medium. I'll show you this in a moment. So what I did is I took some matte medium. So this is clear acrylic paint, matte acrylic paint. And I'm going to take now some white and mix that in. Notice how much white I've put in here in relationship to all that matte medium. I mean, that's maybe 5-to-1 matte medium to white paint. And then I'm really stirring it up well. The reason I'm spending a little bit of extra time here stirring it up, as Bob Marley used to say, is that I basically have a white paint and a clear acrylic that looks white. So it's very hard to tell how well blended those two different substances are. So I really want to make sure I've done a thorough job of it. And then I can test it out by just painting. And so what I want here is this paint that looks semi-transparent. Now I probably could have added an extra little bit of white on. So maybe I will add just a little bit more. I was debating, I was like, maybe I'll just do a second coat. But you know what? It's not too much just to quickly... Again, you could see there's not a lot of extra white I put in there. Maybe I still will do another coat of it. And I think while I'm here, let's just use the same color to paint her, I don't know, what would you call this, a shawl, or? Okay, let's look at them side by side. Okay. Close, but maybe not quite. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly blow dry this, and then I might add just a little bit more. Okay, I'm going to take this, let's do a bit more of that. I might not paint it everywhere, there's a few places I think just need to be a little bit more opaque. So I'm just going to take maybe just a fraction of white. I don't really need a lot of it, because otherwise it's going to just go purely white, and what's the point of going to all this effort, right? I'm just doing a little extra bit. And honestly, I might not even know. I have to blow dry this after I finish painting with this, because it is possible that it looks a lot more white now, but when it dries, it could just go totally clear. So, just to be sure, I'm going to blow dry this again here in a moment. What do you think? White enough? I'm gonna do just a little bit more, and then I will move on. I'm less concerned about the white being in some of these areas, because I'm going to paint that darker anyway, so Okay, I feel pretty good about that. That's good. Barbara says, Michael, did you thin the white? I missed that bit. Yes, I put in some matte medium in there. Actually, there's 3 coats of maybe 80% matte medium to white, maybe even less white than that. Like, literally very small amount of white. I probably could have added, maybe just done 1 layer of 20% white to matte medium. But if you go too far, it's hard to kind of scale it back. So it's all, you know, if you want to be sure, then it doesn't hurt to paint 1 thin layer, blow dry it, paint it again, let it dry, and also out there, we'll do it again, and then you can do it precisely. You know, it's like the difference between, you know, you're baking and you're like, oh, this needs a little bit more salt. It's the difference between just being like, putting a little bit more in, stirring it up, I need a little bit more, as opposed to being like, well, let's just put a whole bunch of salt in there, and then, woo, that is salty, right? So that way we can, rather than over seasoning something, we can just season and then see before we go too far, right? So Kathy is talking about, yeah, the Titanic, yeah, chases 4 days. Wow. I'm the king of the world. Yes. James Cameron in the Titanic. Yeah. Okay. So let's do. So, you know, I look at the original here, and there's a little bit of an internal monologue, and so maybe I'll verbalize that. The internal monologue is, should I move on and paint the figure, or start painting the figure, or do I want to paint the background and kind of just be done with it and move on? And I guess it kind of depends on whether, like, if we're just painting this right now and we're just recreating the original, making a quote-unquote copy of it, well, then probably it would make most sense just to try to mix that color, paint that color, and be done with it. However, I would be willing to bet that that background would have been something Bonnard did towards the end of the painting. What I think he probably did is maybe began painting the figure and then was looking at it and thinking, okay, that's working, but I need to do something to the background to kind of to deal, like, to complement that portrait. So he probably did that blue, maybe not the last thing, because it looks like he painted back over top of it in places, but, like, I mean, I think areas right up here, I see kind of like a brush outlining here, which might tell me that there was something there, and he's being very careful about not painting that blue into the hair. Versus if he had done it before, we would probably see more brushstrokes just kind of cavalierly painting on top of the hair. So that's what tells me that he probably painted the let me see, I'll just show you. Like, do you see this brushstroke right here, that blue brushstroke? So that tells me that he had probably painted a bunch of this and then was starting to fill it in with color, and was quite conscious of not overlapping the face. So so again, the question in my mind is, do we want to paint it in literally the exact same way as Bonnard, or can we say, well, you know, do we really need to do it in that order for our own painting? Because again, he doesn't know what this painting is going to look like before he begins. He's figuring it out as he goes. So if you were to be painting this painting, you would probably maybe work in the same way as Bonnard. You might start getting this face figured out, and then you're like, okay, that's turned out great. Now, what do I put in the background to complement it? And I mean, we can see that very clearly he's using warm and cool colors here. He's got this very vibrant, warm, ultramarine blue right in the foreground. And what do we have in the background? We have a much duller, I would say it's not super cold, but it's definitely a muted blue. It's probably a different blue. It's probably a cobalt blue, which is kind of around on the line between warm and cool, but it's also got some reddish qualities in it. So yeah, anyway, long story short, I think I'm going to start by painting. In fact, let's blow dry this. I think I'm going to start painting actually in that blue, which is different in the actual steps that he took, but just for time's sake, I think, you know, I just talked for a long time. I'm just going to kind of cut a little corner here, so you'll have to forgive me for my lack of authenticity. Okay. So as previously mentioned, we have two different blues here, and this is an excellent example of an artist using warm and cool colors to help create depth in a painting. So rather than using, you know, just a totally different color, a red or a brown for the background, I mean, he's already got brown in the hair, so he's like, well, probably want to see if I can try to use something a little bit different. But I do like the blue, but I can't use the same blue in her dress in the foreground because that's going to do weird things with the depth here. I'm going to use a kind of a more muted purpley blue. So to mix that blue, let's take our cool blue and cool red and mix a color together like that. Maybe not as big of a brush. Don't I have an intermediate size brush between those two? How is that possible? Okay, well, let's use a bigger brush to mix the paint, and whether I use this to paint with it is another story. Okay, so let's take our cool blue. Taking our cool blue and cool red and mix these together. Now there's a few things we could do here, one of which is we could add a little bit of white to this color to lighten it, or another option is we could similarly dilute it with matte medium to make it more transparent and use the white that we have here to optically mix with this purple color. So maybe that's what I'll do here. In fact, why don't we do that right here? I wonder, I might have a bit too much paint on the brush. Let's just try to wipe a bit of paint off and mix in here. Let's get a bit more. So you maybe can already see, if we just enlarge this, paint is already pretty close. In fact, maybe it just needs a bit more red. Honestly, I think maybe it's just still too saturated. Maybe it needs a little bit more matte medium. Well, let's how much paint? Do I want to use a smaller brush? I think I am going to use a smaller brush here. Let's just see. So it's a little bit more saturated than I was hoping. Probably could have added maybe even a little bit of warm red in there just to kind of kill that saturation off. But I wish it was a little bit more subdued. I guess actually it's interesting. In person, I think or on camera, I think it looks a little bit brighter than it is, but it's still not exactly the way to my liking, but it's, I think, good enough for government work, as my grandfather used to say, right? So if I had used warm red instead of the cool red, we would expect an even duller purpley color that would have been a little bit closer to the original. So you know, if I was writing down instructions here, I would say use warm red instead of cool red. So you'd use cool blue and warm red. Because those are almost opposite from one another on the color wheel, and that's how we would make black. In fact, that's what we're going to do right now. So I'm going to take where should we do this? Let's take this cool blue. Maybe let's just do this right here. We'll take cool blue, warm red. In fact, let's just see what that color would look like if we mixed it up. Okay, so you see this is, that's kind of a little bit closer to the color I would have wanted. See how that's got a little bit more saturation still in this one? Yeah, that's what I wanted. I thought, but I thought maybe that would be just too dull. Well, okay, and then some cool yellow. That's maybe a bit too much. Trying to make a black here. So ideally, equal proportions of warm red, cool yellow, and cool blue will get you a black. That's hard to tell. So it's a little bit purpley. You need a little bit more yellow in there to counterbalance that purple. It's not my best mixing of a black. I don't know if there's... Oh, you know what? There was some white. That's why it's kind of a gray. There was some white on my brush. Even just that little bit of white from all the way back here that I mixed them, because I didn't really clean my brush that thoroughly. It's like, why is it not as dark as I wanted? It's okay. Okay, let's just... So I almost want to do a little bit more, change this color, this blue, and make it a little bit less intense. But you know what? Before I do something radical like that and spend all this time, quote unquote, fixing a mistake, let's make sure that it's actually a mistake. Because it's possible that as the painting evolves, I might go, wow, actually that's perfect. That's exactly the way it's supposed to be. I'm glad I didn't spend hours fiddling around in that area. Okay. Let's move on here. Now that we've got our background established, maybe not perfect, because I was just saying I might want to go back and alter it. Let's just see what happens when the foreground starts to take up some of this space, because it might alter the way I feel about the background. So what do we want to do next here? I mean, a few things might be nice. It probably would be satisfying to put in this big blue, warm blue of her shirt up front. And that might give me just some clarity right off the bat as to how it looks in compared to this cooler blue in the background. In fact, so let's do that right off the bat, just because since we were just talking about it Now, if I take this, let's just see, just as an example, if I take my warm blue right out of the tube and I start painting with it on top of this brown, notice how it just kind of goes, like it gets pretty dark, right? So as I do that, I think maybe he did paint all of this with that white wash as well. Did he do that? He might have. You know what? I think he did do that. I was gonna say let's add a little bit of white into our blue, but you know, I think what I'm going to do is take my matte medium again and add maybe not that much white. So just like he painted the majority, like the whole background white, so we probably should have just incorporated this into the same while I was painting the background white and her shawl white. I could have just done this all at once, but hey, sometimes we don't know until we're here. So, you know, again, if I was writing out the instructions for this, I would say just start by paint that all out. That would save me time. So the reason for doing this is when I paint the blue over top of it, rather than kind of being really dark, it's going to kind of be much brighter. I won't have to add white into that blue. Because otherwise I would have to add white to the blue, and then I might even have to paint over it with that blue again. So rather than doing that, if I'm going to have to do something, might as well try to get a little bit closer to Bonnard's method here. I think that should be good enough. But as I said, we shall see. So let's blow dry this. Chase says you should do a painting of Nico Bellic one day. Is that an artist, Nico Bellic? I'm not familiar with their work. Nico Bellic. Let's have a little soda water here. Okay. Now that should be nice and dry. Now, if I paint my warm blue over top of this, we should see a much different result. So it almost looks like I mixed white paint into this blue when it's just the white of the paint, or of the white underneath coming through. Now when you're painting with acrylics, acrylic paint tends to dry pretty quickly, and you can see that part of what he's painting with oil paint 100 years ago, and that paint can stay wet for a long time. And that has some benefits in that, particularly if, you know, these brush strokes, which are transparent, semi-transparent, are going to stay there unless I kind of, you know, brush them into place, I suppose you'd say, right? So I can still see a bit of that brown coming through. I love that. But now I do want to take a little bit of white. Okay, I might go back on top of this here. Let's see. Barbara says, I've been watching the Canadian Landscape Artist of the Year on TV, on the TV Arts channel. It's unusual for the UK to show Canadian shows. I didn't even know there was a Canadian version of that. Huh? Is that a new program? I'm obviously familiar with the British one, or English one. Oh, that's cool. That's really neat to hear. Okay, let's. I want to go back over this with a little bit more blue. So I'm just going to take more warm blue. Notice how because this, ultramarine blue tends to be kind of a bit transparent anyway, I can paint back over top of some of those white lines and they kind of just get absorbed. And they don't disappear, but they're not as bright anyway. That's good. Oh, you know what? Let's well, I'm going to take my black while I'm right here. Oh, let's mix it into that blue. Okay. Chase says, yeah, I heard about Nico Bellic from Grand Theft Auto. In the video game Grand Theft Auto, they have... Okay. Is that a real artist, Nico Bellic? Okay, now you got me, piqued my interest here. Nico Bellic is a fictional character from Grand Theft Auto 4. Oh, so okay, so I thought you meant Nico Bellic was an artist, whose work I should but you're saying actually make a painting of this character from Grand Theft Auto. Interesting. Well, I have done paintings of. I started a whole series of paintings on art and video games, Paint Arcade, so I could certainly add that to the roster. Interesting. Okay. Well, stay tuned for that, Chase. Thanks for the suggestion. I certainly have done any GTA art before. That's great. Thank you. Yes. Sorry, I misunderstood what you meant, Chase. Yes. Cool. Thank you. So let's look at these side by side again and just see how it's unfolding. So I think now, the background, I still kind of want to make it a little bit more muted, but it's not real. I mean, if I had to call it a day, I would not be that bummed out about it. And especially now, once I start getting some white into here, which probably should be my next step, I might feel totally fine with it. So let's start painting a bit of white in here. Let's take our white, and I'll add some matte medium again. But this time, you can see I'm not doing like 90% matte medium to just a little bit of white. In fact, it's maybe about half and half. I just wanted to have just a little bit of transparency here. Preserve a little bit of what was underneath, if possible, where the paint is a little bit thinner. that, I'm almost kind of over-exaggerated, but there was that little bit of white right over her shoulder, which I thought was a really nice touch. Obviously, I wasn't paying close enough attention there, but... So also here where her shoulders, I kind of, you saw me kind of wipe a bit of paint away. One thing I want to be careful about is giving her a big hunch on her shoulder, and so keeping that kind of going down. So I might actually go back and paint this here and just push this background a bit back over her shoulder, which in fact, actually, that's exactly what he did too. So it's nice to kind of feel like, because you can see he painted her some white here. And then he did go back and shrink her shoulder down so it wasn't so big there. Okay, interesting. Okay, I mean, it's always a little bit nice when I make a mistake, like a great artist. I reproduce their own quote-unquote mistake. Or I wouldn't say it's necessarily a mistake. It's just an observation that he made, and then I'm looking at it thinking like, oh, I probably should do the same, and it's like, oh yeah, we both made the same choice, right? So, I may not be a master, but I'm certainly a master at reproducing the mistakes of the great artists. Okay. Now, I think let's move on from her dress, and I'm going to go to a next step here. So now we've worked on her dress, her collar, maybe done. I'm not sure. Again, there's still a little bit on her collar to do for sure. But now let's move on to her face, because rather than fiddling any more with any other things, the face is obviously going to be the central part of this painting, and that could necessitate changes elsewhere, because we still have a lot of this brown Imprimatura coming through, and so the question will be is, once we cover more of that up, will that influence the way that the colors in the background? Will that influence the blue in her dress? Do we want to make them darker or lighter, more saturated, less saturated, so on and so forth? So, now this is, I mean, this is stuff that I love about Bonnard. This is where we're really getting into the nitty-gritty of what makes Bonnard such a wonderful artist, is the way that this is painted is very careful. Like, I imagine Bonnard was a slow painter, so I wouldn't have surprised me if he worked on a painting like this for, you know, maybe a week or so, and I'm talking like painting on it, you know, maybe 4 or 5 hours a day for a week. Just very kind of slow, meticulous. Like, his kind of method of painting is very dabby paints. So I don't want to paint on this for another 4 or 5 days. I'd like to try to get it done within, you know, another hour if I can help it, because I'm going to go see a movie. So I've got to leave shortly, so I want to try to recreate his work in lightning speed. Why did I do this to myself? Okay, so let's what would be the best way forward here. I would say I want to try to get the biggest shapes painted in first. So I'm looking at this and just thinking, what color do I see most commonly used throughout here? And maybe different people would see different things. I think the question would be between this, again, it's kind of like it's kind of ultramarine, but it's also kind of a little bit cobalt. We've got blue here, and then this purple on her face. And honestly, the purple on her face is actually fairly close to the purple that I used for the background, except with some white in it. But I think I'm going to mix a new one that is a little bit more saturated purple, just so that it... Because my first instinct right now is like, okay, well, here's one way I could go about this. I could use the same purple I used for this background, and then I can go and mute my background again, so spend a little bit more time. So this is the color here that I added with some white and matte medium, painted, well, mostly matte medium, painted that there. I think that color is actually the color he's got on the face, perhaps. But I'm going to mix a more saturated purple. Should we do purple? Let's do the blue first, actually. Let's take a bit of blue. And just a tiny bit of cool red in here. So let's start with this. Let's go with a smaller brush. So I'm going to take this kind of mostly bluish color, slightly purpley color. You can see he's kind of shaping her face with it. And using a bit of a dry brush, like almost like a pointillist technique as well. And that's something that, you know, is also comes from Japanese art, is that dry brush technique. Very popular in Japan. Let's get even more. What I should be... I'm going to also use now some glazing fluid here. I need to thin this down, otherwise, especially all that white is just going to obliterate what was underneath there. So glazing fluid is very similar to matte medium in that they are both transparent. They're both paint that has no pigment. The main difference between glazing fluid and matte medium or gloss medium is that glazing fluid has a bit of a slow dry chemical in there. So just kind of slow the drying time down a little bit and enable me to blend paint a little bit. So if I want to kind of blend out some of those colors a bit, this will give me that option. And again, makes it also a little bit more transparent, so some of my brown comes through here. Okay, let's add a little bit more cool red in here. Great thing about glazing fluid is because it's got slow dry qualities here, it'll slow the drying time down. So if I really was unhappy with something I created, I could just try to wipe it right away. Okay, I want to go the other way. So right now I've been sort of kind of putting in these blues. I want to go in and add some reds and yellows. Man, this is one of those things where I feel like I could spend hours, which is exactly what he did, kind of just detailing and changing colors and modifying it. So here's some more warm yellow. A little bit of reflected light on the side of her face here. Really nice touch. So taking that same color, but even bringing a bit, like making a mix kind of in between those, a little bit more of a muted grayish kind of quality. Still needs to be a bit more on this side of things, doesn't it? So what's remarkable is he's probably painting most of this from memory. So he's trying to kind of remember what the light might have looked like. Right, so that looks almost kind of a little bit like a white mustache there, right? So kind of dab a bit of that away. So I'm using my finger to do some smudging. Which he may have used a finger or a rag to do some of this. So maybe that's a little bit on the lighter side. Let's make a bit of a darker gray. Okay, I think what I'm going to do next is, let's clean the paint off of this brush, and I'm going to go back to this brown that I made way back near the beginning, right? And I'm going to paint with that. Let's put a little bit of glazing fluid in there. painting in her hair. Right, again, this glazing fluid allows me to, if I feel like I want a bit more of the underpainting to come through, I can just kind of wipe a bit of it back away. I should be using a slightly bigger brush here. Bit of that gray in there, so just take that gray, put that right on my brush. Okay, let's blow dry that. I got a lot of like wet paint on here. And that wet paint's got slow dry chemicals in there, so it needs an extra little bit of time to dry. The subtlety that he's got there, just like, So this is my brown Imprimatura right from the beginning here. I'm just going to bring a bit of it back into a few places where I feel like it needs to lighten up a little bit. And then I can just take that and just use it to get a little bit darker, kind of halfway in between. I'm going to take a little bit of this really dark, warm blue. See, my face feels more in focus than hers does, and not necessarily in a good way. Right? It feels, because I mean, I can appreciate my painting as its own thing, but but as far as his technique, you know, it's a little bit. It's different. It's again, I'm taking I got warm blue, cool red, and then I've got some white and glazing fluid mixed together to kind of dull it down a little bit. This is a bit of warm red with a little bit of white in it. And some warm yellow and white. That same warm yellow with white on the back of her neck here. I'm going to take just a little bit of white . Where is that? The little reflection. It's a little bit too bold. I think I want to make that not so white, a little bit more of a gray. I mean, it's just those little bits there. Okay, maybe it's time just to move on from the face briefly here. Let's move on to her shirt collar. We've got some of these grays and things already kind of going on. I'm just going to use some of this messy paint in here. Maybe even put a little bit of glazing fluid in there just to get it a bit wet, but and not really even try to blend that color in all that well. Okay, and then while I'm also at it, let's just take glazing fluid and white, mix these guys in together. Let's see how we're doing. I think I'm getting pretty close here. The question would be, am I done? Or do I want to tinker further? Let's look at the original. Now, as the painting has evolved and more blue has taken over in this painting, the white back here definitely seems more reddish. It has more of it's certainly not as saturated as his. So the question is, do I want to add more white back here? Does that bother me that this is not as opaque of a white as I thought? And originally it didn't seem to, I thought it was actually, I might have thought maybe it could have had another coat, but it didn't bother me so much. I'm not saying it necessarily bothers me now, but it's more noticeable that this is kind of a brownish red under here because of the blue. Because that blue, there's so much blue, I mean, we might say, there's 50% of this painting is blue, that it makes anything that's not blue seem more of what it like. It's like, being in a hot tub and jumping out and rolling in the snow and then jumping back in the hot tub. The hot tub now feels way warmer than it is. Nobody dialed up the heat on the hot tub. The hot tub's always stayed the same. But if you were just laying in the snow and you jump into the hot tub, woo, it feels really hot. So same sort of thing. This color didn't change. It was the same color throughout the whole thing. I mean, I suppose someone might say, well, because it has had a little bit longer to cure, technically, perhaps, maybe it has changed very slightly, but anyway. But it has stayed the same, but because I put so much more blue on there, the red in there is accentuated. All right. Does that bother me? Not really. If anything, it's kind of nice because we can see a kind of a difference between the white collar, which is quite bright, very not saturated white, more opaque than this. So that definitely creates a differentiation, which is kind of nice. I mean, I think, do I want to do that background? I was thinking about doing background. Let's do that background because I was thinking about it. And like I said, I think Bonnard himself went back in there. Okay, so I'm sure I get a clean brush here for this. Well, he says, Michael, I love your version. Your young woman is super pretty. Thank you. I mean, I don't mind my version. But it is diverging from the original, mostly because I feel a little bit of urgency to get this done. So I'm not using the same kind of very delicate painting process that he did. These almost like pointless dabs of paint. He kind of like paints in and almost kind of scrubs a little bit, right? And so I don't really have that there. We see a little in his painting, these little kind of gaps of like, the white perhaps underneath, or I'm not sure actually where that's coming from. Maybe a little bit less blending. Well, it's actually, a lot less blending. I kind of did a lot of blending in here with my fingers. We don't really have that so much because he's painting with a kind of a dry paint technique, which actually blends itself fairly well to acrylic, but anyway. So, let's take, I don't have any cool blue left right here, so. So I got cool blue this time and warm blue. Let's mix these two colors together to get a much darker, mostly blue. I'll use glazing fluid. This way, the paint will be more transparent, and if I want to blend anything away, because I'm kind of touching this up and faking it out a little bit. So I just wiped off the excess paint. Let's get this glazing fluid on my brush. Let's take a little bit of black. I'm going to take even a little bit of white. Come on, there we go. Might even do another little bit there as well. I'm not sure how much of that change comes across on camera, but it is darker and duller. But maybe only 5% so. So I'm going to let that dry while it's drying. Okay. I'm pretty happy with, I mean, again, I could keep fiddling with that just purely to make it match the original. I think I do want to, it looks like he did darken a little bit there, though. Let's just get a little bit more paint, which is not uncommon for maybe one side of the face to be a little bit darker than the original. So this is that paint, but just far less glazing fluids, a little bit more opaque, which makes it a little bit darker. I'm tempted to do that there. Maybe I'll hold off. Okay. Maybe just, actually, I should just... Okay, we're within a minute or two of wrapping up. I just want to do a quick little finishing touches here. There's not really much to do. I'm feeling pretty good about how things have unfolded. I'm just taking a little bit more warm blue. I think I just want to bring out a few bits more warmth in her shirt in the foreground here. So... because rather than continuing to try to darken this and mute that background, that cool blue, I could go the opposite way. And I could make the foreground more saturated, more intensely warm. And that is sort of we'll have the opposite effect of, well, to help kind of pull, instead of trying to push the background further back, we can also try to pull the foreground forward. And ultramarine blue is such a gorgeous, gorgeous color that, you know, probably would be nice to have. No one's going to complain with more ultramarine blue. It'll help make the painting just glow. Paint over my blacks a little bit. Like, notice I didn't paint over everything, and I'm also, again, even though it's very transparent, I'm trying to paint follow the lines that are already here, right? So that everything is in harmony here. I am contemplating adding a little bit more blue right on her eye there. It's a little disheartening to see them right up close side by side and be like, oh, wow. Look how I diverged from the original there. But not everyone is as great as Bonnard, so I'm just taking my warm blue here. It's like a tiny bit of, I don't mind having a little bit of that gray in there actually, because it's certainly not fully blue. And one of the reasons why I feel like I kind of need this is because I just made the blue so intense. Part of what those colors are in her face is that reflected light from her shirt onto her face. So that also needs to be amped up a little bit as well, because if her shirt's going to be that bright, well, then that should be literally reflected in her face. And if not, then her shirt's going to dominate the painting. And it's part of those little bits of purples and pinks in her face that are so, I think, so compelling about this painting. So let's mix a bit of that in there. I'm going to put a little bit of glazing fluid in here. See that there's a little bit of reflected light on that other side. Slightly gray yellow. Just kind of using my finger to dab up a little bit of that paint. Maybe it wasn't a little bit too much, I think. Okay, I think I've got to run. So, we made it to the end of another episode. I said it would be about 3 hours, so 3.5. That's probably the closest I've been to my estimate in maybe a year, so that's not bad. I'm pretty happy with the way this painting turned out, so let's take a look, compare them side by side. Again, just a quick little reminder to hit the like button, the notification button, and the notification bell, subscribe button. Some buttons, hit just a bunch of stuff down there. That would be awesome. And if you want to support the channel with a small donation, as like little as $1, $5, $1.5 million, I won't turn it down. That's what helps keep the lights on, why I'm still doing this 4 years, almost 4 years after I began. So thank you to all of those of you who've continued to support the channel. Take a photograph of whatever you've created today, upload it to our Facebook group so that we can celebrate your work. Within the next week, I'll be doing a bonus episode. I'm not, maybe even as soon as this Sunday, depending on if I'm teaching on Sunday. I'm not sure. So you want to get any work you want feedback on up on the Facebook group ASAP. But if you miss it this time around, tune in anyway, and then check out how that unfolds if you want to participate. It's all free. I just love talking about people's art and celebrating art, because I think you're doing a world a great favor if you're making art. Okay, so there's our original, and let's see the two side by side here. Okay, come on. Okay, so I'm happy with this. Is it a little bit different than Bonnard's? I think I've captured Bonnard's process throughout most of the painting. Where I think I've differed is on the face, which some might say is what it's all about, but it's just because of time. Like, he would have spent hours and hours and hours fiddling in that area, and that's what gives his paintings that very kind of unique, dreamlike quality, whereas mine is way more defined than his. It's because it's tricky to, it's hard to let it be undefined like that. I mean, that's one of the great qualities of Bonnard, and also one of the qualities people disliked about his work. As again, I said, Picasso could not stand Bonnard, hated his work like with a passion, whereas Matisse loved it, right? Everyone's got a different opinion about art, and maybe none more so than Bonnard. So I'm sure there's a few people who don't like this work either, right? So, but that's okay. There's another 300 other paintings there to do if you like. You know, in person, actually, I find this blue really kind of that warm blue, especially that last little bit of warm blue that I put on there. It's still not dry, so it could change as it dries. But that, I feel, has done a really nice counterbalance to that duller color in back. And I did try to make it even more dull, and I could do it again. But by the more and more I do that, the less spontaneous these brushstrokes are going to appear, and the more they're going to seem labored. And a big part of this painting is the feeling of it just like, boom, spontaneously happening, right? Even though, again, he worked on paintings, many paintings simultaneously, but for, you know, months and months and months. So this painting, even though I just did this in a, you know, couple of hours, he I'm sure would have spent, you know, a couple of weeks just slowly doing little details, one little brushstroke at a time. Which is why, you know, there's no way to cheat that, and I wouldn't be able to capture that quite the same qualities that he was able to do. So let's zoom in here, look at them side by side. Let's go in a little tighter there. You know, okay, so let's maybe just look at other parts of the painting first. So there we have, you know, yeah, you can really see how much more gray that appears, this background blue. But, you know, the foreground color, I mean, it's basically blue, right, ultramarine right out of the tube. I'm sure it's exactly what he used. You can see he's painting with oil paint, and those colors are blending and mixing. where that's much harder to do with acrylic paint, so I had to kind of use a sort of slightly different process. And then her chest down here, that kind of reflection, maybe I could have put a little bit more white there. I don't know, I think that's okay. I'm just noticing there's a little bit of that brown Imprimatura popping through here. I actually kind of like that. That wasn't intentional on my part. I'll just show a bit more. Sometimes I think those are really kind of nice. They're just like a little quick little hint, wink to the viewer as to how the painting was done. So sometimes that's stuff that I love looking at when I'm looking at painting. So let's look at her shoulder. So you can see on this side where I did put more of that cold blue and warm red over top here, how pretty much the color is very similar, almost identical, right? So I was correct. I made the mistake originally, but I had to see it to know that I was wrong. And so you could see that on this side, it's pretty much the exact right color, but on the other side, not so much, because I didn't put as much paint back on top out of fear that I would lose a little bit of the energy that he captured there. So I was pretty kind of quick with these brushstrokes on the collar, which is what we need to do. You know, it's hard to kind of do bold brushstrokes like that, but that's what he's done. He's done some fairly quick little marks in there to quickly delineate the folds in the shirt. Maybe a little bit more accurate than what I've done, but same sort of thing on this side. Maybe just before we go to the face, let's just kind of look at the edge of the painting. Yeah, so again, you can see really how quite different this blue, even though that's fairly dull, it's still nowhere near as dull as the one on the back. But I couldn't make that connection until I had more of the painting completed here. So not a big deal, but it's just it's something. I liked this kind of this little squiggle, that line there he put. I think that was kind of nice. And again, you can see this kind of, it's like almost like a milk wash, you might say, right? Where it's that kind of, you still see the texture coming through. Those are things that I love, whether you do or not. So this is definitely, I'm actually surprised at how, I think this is, it's not as orangey brown as it appears on camera right now. The camera is, I think, got 5% more warm red in here, so that's bringing out, and it's also a little bit brighter so that you can see in the shadows when I'm painting. So it's not quite like that. It's actually more similar to the original, but I do feel a little bit like the way that I painted the hair was a bit of I kind of phoned that in a little bit. Not so happy with how that turned out, but I'm not going to fix it or do anything to it. And then let's just wrap up with the close-ups on the face here. I mean, interestingly enough, I gotta say, the way that I painted this reminds me maybe more of Picasso than of Bonnard, which I'm sure would just absolutely delight Picasso to no end, because he could not stand Bonnard's paintings, and is a little bit of a betrayal of Bonnard. Because, I mean, that's basically what Picasso did not like about the work of Bonnard, is the the level of ambiguity that's happening here. And Picasso was all about the line. He was the king of the line. He was like the great draftsman of the 20th century. So he always wanted more clarity, lines everywhere. It's no mistake that he is the co-creator of Cubism, right? Picasso, yeah. So and that's why he didn't like Bonnard's work. He always thought Bonnard's work just looked too like delicate, you know. Picasso was, you know, this super macho dude who wanted things to be bolder and tougher, and Bonnard's always have this feeling of like a, you know, it could evaporate any moment, that it's like a dream that is, you know, we're on the edge of sleep, you know, we're snoozing. The alarm already went off. We push the snooze button, and we're back in kind of dream world. But we can start hearing people moving around the house. That's what we see in Bonnard's painting on the left. On my painting on the right, again, a little bit more Picasso-ish in that it's even just the way that I painted the more Romanesque kind of features here. I mean, it's not a bad thing to compare or ego to say that my painting has more of a Picasso-ish quality. Flattering myself, obviously, for sure. But yeah, it's just that's the thing with trying to recreate a painting by a great artist like that, is that it's sometimes my own style is going to come out and sometimes overpower the original artist's work. Close. But if I was teaching this class and somebody showed me this painting, I'd say, yeah, I don't think you quite got it, Michael. You almost did it, and then you fumbled it on the end zone. Having said that, I'm sure I'm not. I don't want to be too hard on myself, because I think I'm going to be very happy with this painting. I'm just a little disappointed I didn't quite do Bonnard justice. So my apologies, Pierre. We're going to do another episode on your work next week. So we'll have a little bit of more of an opportunity to redeem myself. So please stop spinning in your grave. I'm sure someone watching right now will do you justice. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in, for painting along with me today. I look forward to seeing what you created. Again, I think we might be doing a bonus episode on Sunday, just a few days from today. So if you want to participate in that, join the Facebook group, take a photograph of your work, upload it there, and I'll cull through all the great stuff that you guys have created so that we can celebrate your achievement and give you a little bit of pointers how I might do things a little bit differently, right? Okay, everyone, have a great evening. Enjoy your time on our beautiful planet. I wish you all joy and happiness, smiles for all time. Love you all. Thanks again. We'll see you again soon. Good night. Oh, goodness, I think I'm losing my mind today. What is going on in that?